I'd like to thank B&H, Stephanie, Deborah, and the crew here for having me in to talk. They've invited me to speak. We have a recently released book by Bloomsbury Publishing, The Fashion Image. I'd also like to thank Bloomsbury for publishing the book and for their distribution. That'll be the core of the conversation today. We'll be discussing creating compelling fashion images, but it'll be based on the structure of the book. Please follow along on Instagram or Facebook. There are other events and other things coming up around the country and internationally, so we'll be announcing them there. There's a talk coming up in San Diego on March 14th, one in London, one in Norway, and I think one in Texas. So follow along and see where that is. We won't have a lot of text today, but we're going to start off that way. Great fashion images are a reflection of the moral, social, and technological and economic imperatives of the era in which they were created in a way that other sociocultural genres are not. Great images and image makers address these ideas with an at times predictive understanding of what is next. Doing so with a visual style that combines contemporary culture with commerce. Neither talent nor technical acumen is the only consideration here. Exceptional photographers are able to reference deeply, draw from an innate understanding of the trends that are shaping the cutting edge of contemporary culture. In short, great fashion image makers get it. They ride the tip of the wave, intuitively creating images that speak to the essence of the moment. And in doing so, they become manifestations of a cultural dialogue of their era. Historically, from wartime to economic booms, fashion design and the imagery that defines it has shown us where our boundaries lie and how we seek to embrace or break them. It addresses social mores. It talks about lifestyle, desire, fantasy, and a number of other areas in which we seek to either belong or participate or imagine ourselves. It is also about identity, subculture, and the desire to belong. As genre, fashion photography and fashion film are resonant forms of visual anthropology. Fashion collections and campaigns are consumptive. They and the imagery of each era are quite simply one of the best arbiters we have of the times in which we live and have lived. A great portrait informs and entertains, but a great fashion photograph also engenders a much larger conversation. So first I'd like to thank the photographers in the book, without whom the book wouldn't be possible. They illustrate and bring to life the text. It's 80,000 words. It covers a number of areas which we'll review quickly. Therese Joel photographed the cover image. I think it's important to give people credit where credit's due, two talented young photographers. I'd also like to thank the interviewees for their wisdom and insight and for sharing their vision and knowledge and sitting down for interviews, because that's what I'm able to share with you. 41 people in the industry were interviewed for the book, ranging from photographers like Mario Sorrente, Arthur Elgort, stylists like Harry Josh or Brendan Cannon. We have heads of modeling agencies, we have heads of studios, Milk Studio, Splashlight Studio, a number of photographers, and people from around the world. It's an extraordinary group of people, and without them, the book wouldn't have been possible. Contents. We talk about the image, and then we talk about fashion concepts, which we'll cover today. But it's also important to note that you cannot create a compelling fashion image without a great creative team. You have to put together an amazing team. And that includes your assistants, your styling team, the modeling agency, and many others, right? You need to understand the client's team. It's impossible to work in an industry where you don't understand the language of your client. You need to understand the client's team. You need to understand how the fashion industry works, how things are designed, how different fashion designers at different scale design their images, how that design process works, and what your role in it is, or what the role is of, say, a creative director, or the fashion designer, or the design team, or a stylist, quite frankly. We talk about developing shoot concepts, because you have to come up with creative concepts that not only speak to your ideas, but speak to the audience of your client, speak to their core brand identity, right? And manifest that in a positive way cross-culturally, right? And frequently, as we discussed in the last chapter, you're not sending your images to a single culture. As you move things online, they move cross-culturally. We'll discuss that later today. But the meaning of certain symbols used take on a more important role as you move cross-culture. We talk about creativity, working with a model, working with a garment, fashion and film camera movement. We talk about shoot production and post-production. All of these things are essential to your ability to create a compelling fashion image. Fashion to me is a reflection of culture, not about whether everyone's wearing a trench coat. It's a report on the world at large. Camilla Nickerson, who is a contributing editor at large at Vogue. So what does that mean? Well, if you think about the turn of the century, fashion was done in illustration by hand, right? And fashion was an aspiration. It was high society. It was people who had the desire to live like somebody who was well-moneyed. And the garments that were shown were frequently out of the reach of many everyday people. As you moved into the 30s and 40s, during wartime, what you found is, for instance, in London, Clifford Colfin did a photograph of a woman in Grosvenor Square, a bombed-out building in the center of London. She's wearing the same kind of finery that you saw at the turn of the century. Why is that image important? It wasn't about putting somebody in a beautiful dress in a deconstructed space, but it was really discussing the idea of how maybe the bourgeois idea of fashion and society didn't seem as important when survival was at the forefront. How we perceive fashion, how you illustrate fashion changes with the time that you're in. It changes with the needs of the people in the country and the culture around you. You need to be aware of that as you're making imagery. In America, Vogue magazine illustrated wartime imagery with a lot of American flags, women dressed like Lady Liberty. You also saw a number of models wearing garments that were in greens, grays, and browns. They were very tailored, they had narrow lapels, and that reflected the uniforms worn by men in the war at that time, right? So maybe it was subliminal, maybe not, but it was all in support of the larger war effort. Everybody was in it together, right? Like I said, you saw images of the American flag. Many images during that period did not show a woman's lower half because nylons weren't available. Nylon and other materials frequently used in dressmaking and women's wear were now being used for the war effort. So if you look at some of the covers, one for instance says, take a job, help send a man to war, or something like that. Like women moved into the workplace. You had a different kind of garment, but you also didn't show the materials that weren't available. As you moved post-war, you had Dior's New Look collection. The New Look collection was very feminine and very luxurious, had cinched waists and hats and gloves, full skirts, and there was a use of large volumes of material. Why? Because we were celebrating the ability to be feminine again. We were celebrating the ability to be free. We were celebrating the ability to use these materials because we now had them. Models were more full-figured. You saw celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, and people were celebrating freedom. And they were also celebrating access. As you moved to the late 60s, you had one generation pushing against the next, as we always do, right? So you had Twiggy, a very slender, androgynous girl who was the face of the late 60s, early 70s, right? She was very boyish, much unlike the full-figured women you saw in the era before. She was active. She reflected the ability of photographers who now had 35 millimeter technology and were able to move and pan. You saw a lot of movement. You saw a lot of energy. It spoke to the idea of counterculture, being on the road, and having a certain amount of freedom. And I think it's interesting the use of 35 millimeter at that time, because a lot of traditional fashion photographers said those photos weren't good enough. If you weren't using 4x5 and you weren't using medium format, you were using 35 millimeter, your photos shouldn't or weren't be good enough to run in the magazines. It's a conversation we have now as we move to digital and now to phones. The idea of good enough is something that's been in our culture. We then moved to the supermodels of the 80s. Then we moved into the 90s and we had hip hop culture. Tommy Hilfiger brought hip hop culture to the fore. He and a lot of hip-hop artists like Aliyah and Snoop Dogg appropriated preppy culture, and Tommy turned it into the visual language of hip-hop. A lot of suburban kids bought and wore those clothes because they felt they could be closer to the urban lifestyle, and it changed things. But then you had people like Damon John, who started FUBU, For Us By Us, or Puffy, who started Sean John, and you had a large number of young black designers taking over that part of the industry. It was a big social change. Now we see a slowly shifting demographic on the runway. The runways are becoming more diverse. We have more trans models. We have more models of color, and it's an important step. So, as we move into the fashion, This is an image by Jonathan Camboris for Gucci lipstick. So fashion is an illustration of who we are, who we desire to be, who we imagine ourselves to be. It's a beautiful image. That little smudge is actually very luxurious, isn't it? It's creamy, it's beautiful, the color is rich. Even the way the lipstick is broken off and the illustration of the G's is perfect, right? That's because Gucci is a luxury brand. We want to feel luxurious, we want to be beautiful. If you're wearing Gucci, you want to associate yourself with that kind of brand identity. Quality, color, and beauty, right? So as a fashion image maker, you need to consider the brand you're working for and the people who are going to be wearing it. When producing a shoot, you have to carefully consider every small element within the frame. You're referencing things that are so much bigger than fashion. You try to inject these images with more than the clothes, makeup, or hair. It depends on what the story is. But you're taking inspiration from social movements, art, literature, people on the street, from everything. You talk about a lot of different influences at the magazine. As an editor in New York, this is what you need to do. Lizzie Oppenheim, she was interviewed for the book, and is a good friend. She also helped photo curate the book. So the difference between a good and great fashion image is a million little details, right? Or a good and great photograph is a million little details. It's the palette and how you tie the palette together, how the tones work together. It's the detail of the makeup and how that plays against the hair and the styling, right? When we talk about contemporary culture, it's the material on the clothes, it's the sexuality, it's the gesture. So I want you to begin, as we look through these images today, to think about all the little details that separate one fashion photograph from another, that make it stand out. I also want you to think about how each of these concepts, you can utilize each of these concepts to begin to develop your own body of work. Beauty. Beauty is a beautiful and important form of fashion. This is a more traditional fashion photograph, right? We see a more traditional lip, a traditional makeup, a girl that for many generations people may have considered beautiful. But currently we see people working in a lot of other ways. This is Marcellus Look. He graduated from Parsons 3 years ago, and he developed this style while he was there. There's a lot of retouching. The models are some would say plastic. I would say not quite that point, but overly retouched. Post is part of his creative process. Marcelo has utilized this style to develop a career in Los Angeles, and he's now photographing for a large number of beauty and beauty companies, and also for a number of celebrities, right? He takes people who often aren't what we would consider traditionally beautiful, or he doesn't present them in traditional ways that we would imagine them to be traditionally beautiful, and elevates them. He creates an extraordinary story. You have people like Stephen Brahms and Justin Borbely, who ask us to think of other ways to address the idea of beauty, right? Different kinds of faces, diversity in terms of skin tone or lifestyle, different kinds of hair, a different kind of look. We have a different kind of light than we saw in the initial beauty image, right? It's not the large softbox look. We have a much harder light and a different lifestyle. These were shot for ID magazine for a series on beauty. So we see a different dialogue around beauty. Each generation, although we tend to not think, produces a different ideal of beauty and allows you as a fashion image maker to take a different range of images and create in a different way. Mario Sorrenti, I've never been interested in trends. I've always been interested in everything that surrounds me. And I'll let you read that while telling you about Mario. Mario, when he was 20, was dating Kate Moss. Kate Moss was 17 years old at the time. They were living in London. Kate came over and met the creative director, Fabian Baron, who had just redesigned Harper's Bazaar magazine. And one of the most extraordinary redesigns ever. If you want to see extraordinarily designed and edited fashion magazine, take a look at the Harper's Bazaars of the 90s. So Kate met Fabian Baron. Mario came over. Fabian Baron saw the images that Mario had done of Kate and her friends, right? He was a young photographer. He was just starting out, so he's photographing her friends. His friends happened to be Kate Moss. So probably an easier way to start out. Baron said to Calvin Klein, you have to see this girl and you have to see these photographs. Mario went over with his box of photos. Calvin Klein looked at him and said, you have an extraordinary energy between you. There's a connection that I haven't seen anywhere else. I'm going to send you to a villa in Italy for a week to photograph her. And that's going to be our new obsession campaign. So they spent a week in Ity. Mario photographed her, Kate says, for a week nude on the sofa. She says he got the picture in the first day. He swears he didn't. And they came back with a series of images that really launched Kate's career, along with the other Calvin Klein campaign and a Bazaar cover, and launched Mario's career. It got him a contract with Harper's Bazaar and with a number of other clients, other designers. It was extraordinary. And it also changed the way we looked at fashion. Kate was kind of the anti-model at that point. She was smaller. She didn't look like Cindy Crawford or Naomi Campbell. She was more waifish. The way he photographed her was far more intimate. So there was an intimacy to the image, but there was also a distance in the way that she looked back at you. Elaine Constantine photographs fashion in a very different way. She approaches it in two ways. Think of the idea of tribe. What are the places we want to belong to, and who do we want to be a part of? We've all experienced this moment as kids in some form or another. That moment where you're with your friends, you're out of control, and you're having a great time, right? But notice how all of the girls are also wearing similar clothes, right? What Elaine did was she took images and created them around her life as a young girl in London. She grew up a very working class girl in London, and all of this is about growing up working class. So you have this great shared moment, this amazing energy, beautiful clothes, but they all have this same field, because what we do is we share those moments as young people. We share this. We want to be part of it. We want to be part of a tribe. She also shows or recreated the idea of being at a rave or a club or at a concert where you're body passing and you're hanging out with your friends and you're screaming and yelling, right? Because it's also a different form of tribe. It's a form of shared community. So when you look at fashion, what are the places where community intersects? What are the groups that we want to belong to? Where are the places that we desire to be a part of? Or what are the memories that might spark us to think back and feel nostalgic about what you're photographing? So you can take pieces of your own life, your own history, and utilize them as concepts for fashion photographs. Diggy Lloyd takes the idea of utilizing her personal history in a different way. She photographs the places she knows from growing up, the places she spends her time now. So her grandmother owns a home in the Northeast. She grew up in Ohio. And the idea of family, of pleasure, of a simple lifestyle is very close and dear to her. This lifestyle work has actually gotten her shoots with Puma, Levi's, and a number of other campaigns, right? So taking the idea of personal life and lifestyle, utilizing it as a shoot concept, but in a different way, has built a career for Diggy. This shot, actually, they were on a shoot. They were driving up the California coastline. They stopped at a rest stop. A semi pulled away, and Diggy saw the cement barriers and the wire up above. And she asked the girls if they get out, put on their clothes, and get on the barrier and jump. So they did a series of pictures like this. It's a really simple moment. I think that we often make fashion too difficult. I think we often make a lot of our photographs too difficult, right? We make creating an image such a big thing in our minds that we never get to it. Right? We create a million barriers that keep us from actually making the image. So on one hand, yes, you need to be aware of a million small details when you take a picture, but on the other hand, you need to allow spontaneity. You need to get out and take the photograph. And as long as you're considered and everything feels intentional when you create a photograph, a fashion photograph in particular, as we're talking about today, you can come up with something that's interesting and compelling, but also something that you're able to articulate, right? Neither of these requires a large amount of money, a huge crew, or a big set. It's just being smart about choosing your model, your location, your style, and your garments, right? So you can create a compelling fashion portfolio, and it doesn't need to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, as we all imagine. That authenticity creates a sense of intimacy, something we can relate to, and it makes the picture feel authentic, and we buy in not only to the image and the reality of the moment, but also to the brand and the garment and the client, right? Because ultimately, that's our job as fashion photographers, is we want people to understand the core brand identity and buy into the idea of the brand. Therese Joel created this series of images on the beach. It was a story about surf lifestyle. It's extraordinary. And beautiful black and white, everything is perfectly articulated. What they do is they shoot natural light, but they always fill with a single speed light. Right? So one flash, sometimes it has a softbox, sometimes it's hard light, but they always pop a little fill that makes the images feel both real but a little otherworldly, a little not real. And that's part of what grabs our attention. It's part of how they tell the story. Again, great story about surfwear. It's surf life that's a little better than surf life. You have the guy in the car, simply styled in the jeans and the shoes, right? He's looking out. They fill him just a bit. You can tell they filled this just a bit with the flash. You see harder shadows in other places, so they've opened that up so we hold detail when we go to print. He's up there looking off. The camera perspective is great. It tells a story, right? We're looking up at the image. So it starts the story off really well. And it's a long shot, so we get a sense of the environment and the scene. We move into another long shot, but from a different perspective. So now she's moving away. So we have still against motion, which creates a more active edit, right? This is a much longer story, but I'm giving you a short edit of it. So when you have still against moving, it creates a more active edit. It activates the story. She's moving away, but she's looking at us, which ties us into the frame, right? If you do a fashion story with 4, 5, 6, 8 images, and there isn't an image where the model's looking at you off the frame, it makes it harder for the audience to connect with the image and with the story. We move out to this great shot, again, a little pop with the flash. We set her up against the ocean, which is really gorgeous, also centered, but then we move off to the right. We have this medium shot from the back, which could be really absolutely horrible, but we have this gentleman looking back. He's filled with the sun, and he's filled with a little strobe that opens all this up, opens up the nice shadow, and that gives us movement, right? So we have a long shot, full body. We have a long shot with full body, but a little larger the frame. Then we move way back environmentally. Then we move in close. The actors, the models in each one move from one side of the frame to the center to create pace, and the camera angle changes to create pace and engagement. So really beautiful story, a really beautiful fashion narrative that's also lifestyle, right? So we've seen Kate's images, we've seen Joel and Therese's images, and we looked at Elaine Constantine's images, all different ways of illustrating lifestyle fashion, right? All different ways to bring your story and your narrative, your visual perspective to fashion. It doesn't need to be singular. There's no one right way. And I think that's really important, because we look at pictures in a magazine, or we look at a single magazine, we imagine that's the way to do it, right? If you're gonna shoot for American Vogue, it's commercial, not too commercial, but commercial enough. If you're photographing for Italian or French Vogue, it's much more, or W magazine, right? You're allowed much more artistic freedom. It's still commercial, and it's about the garment, but they want to have a different audience, and they want a different creative space, right? So it isn't just about creating the best image you can, but it's creating the best image you can, and the visual style, and the visual language, and the cultural language that fits the magazine that you're shooting for, or the brand you're shooting for. Miriam Santos is a really good friend. Miriam always wanted to meet David Bowie. That was her goal. So we were at the GQ Man of the Year Awards years ago, and she tried to run backstage to meet him, and he ran up into the after party before she could catch him, and she was really disappointed. She didn't know how she was going to meet David Bowie. She wanted to photograph music, so she met him on his fan site. Actually met him on his fan site. They chatted for a while. She talked him into believing that she was legit, and he flew her out to photograph his 5-borough tour that he did. I don't know, must have been maybe 15, 20 years ago at this point. So she got to photograph 5 boroughs with David Bowie. Pretty amazing. You guys look really quiet about it, but it was a pretty amazing experience. I think it changed her life. Would have changed mine. The images are actually stunning. He introduced her to a number of other artists because he loved the images so much. Now she hangs out with everyone, Tommy Lee, everybody. The reason I bring this up is because this is one of Miriam's pictures. Miriam did, and I have a lot of people ask, how do I change my career? How do I move into fashion? Or if I'm shooting, how do I build that next step to my career, right? And I think it's really important now to diversify when you can. You're allowed that, right? 1980s, 1990s, you had to be a certain kind of photographer in a certain way, and you weren't allowed to do anything else. Now you can shoot fashion, you can exhibit, you can write, you can curate. In Miriam's case, what she did is she became the artistic director. She became Andre Day's artistic director. Now, if you don't know Andre Day, that's fine, but she's an extraordinary singer. She was on the Grammys. She has an Apple campaign out. I don't know, she's been on a number of other things, morning shows, et cetera, et cetera. She has a stunning voice. What Miriam did is said, I'll photograph everything, but as your career builds, my career will build too, and I'll creative direct your work. So she oversees the video production. She oversees, still shoots by other people, right? So she's still a photographer, she still shoots, and she still works with other people, but she travels everywhere with Andra. And it's pretty amazing, because I follow along on her Instagram, and I'll give you that later on. But all of a sudden you'll see this picture of Miriam, like the top of her head, at the Grammys in an elevator with everybody. And this is Miriam, who's chasing David Bowie up the stairs a few years earlier. It's pretty extraordinary. And I think that's important, because it's possible, right? A lot of the things you imagine are impossible are possible. You have to work really hard. Miriam works extraordinarily hard, 7 days a week, but she made it happen. You can make it happen, truly. So Andra Day, fashion. Extraordinarily stylish, extraordinarily well styled, but also the idea of fantasy, right? A lot of people want to be Andra Day. A lot of people want to make that walk from backstage to front of the house, right? So you can photograph somebody like Andra or somebody in this setting and create that idea of the singer backstage. What does it mean? And how do the people who adore Andra love this image? Well, they want to imagine that they're there with her. They want to imagine they're going to make that walk one day themselves, right? I call it the American idolization of America, right? All of a sudden we all believe that we can be famous, or we should. I mean, we should, right? Right? How many people want to be famous? Be honest. One, two, three. All right, four people. We're getting a little honesty in the room. All right. So, and the rest of you just kind of want to hang out? No? No? Make a couple bucks?
No answer.
No answer?
Make a few bucks.
Make a few bucks, at least. So sensuality. How do you illustrate sensuality, right? Sexuality is one thing, but how do you illustrate sexuality? In these images, we have a simple gesture to the face and a gaze. We have a girl laying back in the car with a certain emotional quality, right? Sensuality has a quality, it has a feel, right? It's about a lifestyle, it's about a way of feeling. So it isn't just about sexuality, but it's about a feel. And we all connect to different forms of sensuality, but I think it's important because it's a great way to activate your fashion images and all your work. So frequently when we talk about images like this, people think sexual. Sensual actually touches us on a much deeper level, male or female, right? It's about the tilt of a head, with closed eyes, somebody's skin. It's about all those little things, right? It's about the beauty of the light and the quality of the light. Three very different types of light, all used to illustrate the same thing, but all tied together with the model appropriate for the gesture, appropriate for the moment. Androgyny. So what does it mean to style somebody in a little more androgynous way? What does it mean to address ideas of gender fluidity in fashion? These are concepts that are very popular now, and I think it's important, right? And quite frankly, they've been popular since the 70s. If you look at David Bowie, David and Mick, all sorts of things, right? The 70s were actually very progressive in a lot of ways. So these aren't contemporary dialogues. These are dialogues that had emerged, kind of disappeared for a while. Stephen Meisel did a great story on trans boys, I think back in the mid-90s or late 90s, and we have a number of images and photographs addressing this dialogue. But there are a lot of different ways to address the idea of androgyny and the way you feel and how that's illustrated. Harry Josh is a celebrity hairstylist. Harry actually started out couch surfing everywhere. He got a job at Vogue and worked in Vogue for a while in the offices, did all the little things that people do in Vogue to try to become part of it. And he met a girl named Giselle when she first came here from Brazil. So we now know Giselle as one of the leading models in the world. She's also the wife of Tom Brady, right, the football player. And Harry has become her stylist. Whenever she can, she brings him along on a shoot. They become friends. Harry works with celebrities around the world. He has his own brand of styling products. He's created a career out of it. So I think it's interesting. If you're interested in what I do, you need to locate yourself in 3 places in the world, maybe 4, New York, London, Paris, or Los Angeles. And it's true, right? If you want to work in the business of fashion, yes, you can send images from anywhere. Yes, you can travel anywhere. Yes, you can do things on location. But unless you're where everybody is, unless you're part of the dialogue, unless you have access to the garments, right? If Fashion Week has just ended, right? So what happens? After Fashion Week, the PR firms have all the garments. Those get sent out to magazines, or they get sent out to photographers to produce editorials, right? The campaigns have already been done. So how does that affect our industry? Well, I've been on sets where somebody will say, you can have this pair of shorts for 2 hours this morning, and then we have a messenger coming up to take it to another set. Why? Because everybody wants to photograph those shorts. Right? So if you're not around and you're not here to get the only set of fill-in-the-blank clothes to shoot for that editorial, you're not in the loop. If you're not here to work with models that feel like they're from here, there's a difference, right? I grew up in Wisconsin. I lived in Los Angeles, and when I first came to, and I still dress like I'm from Wisconsin, which makes it challenging for me when I do fashion work. I walk on set and people are like, you? I'm like, yeah, sorry. You know, what can you do, right? I can't escape it. But once you shoot for a while, people begin to buy in and they begin to trust you, so you need to find a way to get people to buy in, right? But you need to be able to access people on set. My first portfolio looked like it was shot in Los Angeles. Even though I shot girls from the agencies and I worked hard to get the right clothes, it didn't have that feel. Not that that's an inherently bad thing, but it made it difficult for me to work for the magazines that I wanted to work for. There was an editor at the time at Condé Nast who, just out of the Carla Poppenfuss, out of the kindness of her heart, I swear I still don't know why, met with me every time I would come to New York. I had an apartment in Brooklyn. I had broken windows. I had like a towel tucked in the window. It was like, you know, it was a rough neighborhood, but I couldn't afford to keep staying at hotels, so I got this little room in an apartment. I would go back and forth, and Carla would meet with me, and I shot all the work that I saw in her magazine. Like, I nailed it, and I couldn't figure out why she wouldn't hire me. And about 1.5 years, 2 years later, I'd been doing another body of work. I'd been doing a bunch of stuff with models that were maybe the opposite of what they had and trying other things. And I put together a portfolio, and I came out, and I told myself if nobody liked that work, I was going to quit. I was going to quit. I couldn't take it anymore. So I went in, and I showed Carla this portfolio, and she looked at it, and she said, how wonderfully unself-conscious. I've been waiting for this. Now I know what you do. Let me introduce you to everybody. And she walked me into the back, and she introduced me to all the editors, and then she took me down the floors and introduced me to other magazines. I couldn't believe it. So it isn't about imitating what you see in the magazines. It's about creating a version of that speaks to who you are and where your creative edge lies, and then taking that into the world, right? Because that voice resonates. That voice resonates now more because we see a lot more images, right? I was going to talk about it, but Instagram. Every editor that I know looks at Instagram. You should have a professional Instagram account that just speaks to your work, right? Some of you have very well-established ones. But
or get deleted.
or get deleted all the time. Or a professional Facebook page. And I know a lot of people are over Facebook, but I think it's really important, as I say to my students at Parsons, even if you're not active on Facebook, if I work with people all around the world. I spend a lot of time in Russia, I work with the UN, I do other things. And there's no way I'm going to keep in touch with everybody, follow their updated email addresses, their phone books, or even send them emails every year or a holiday greeting. But if I'm going to travel to a country or I need to do a shoot somewhere, I can go on Facebook or on Instagram and I can reach out to those people and have an instant network, even if I hadn't seen them in years. So even if you're not posting regularly, the presence in those places is important. Another example is I was at Photo Plus, Photo Plus East over at the Javits Center. And I was coming down an escalator, and there was an editor going up the other escalator. I said, hey, and they said, hey, Thomas, how are you? Fine, how are you? Hey, love that work you're doing in Russia. I said, how do you know that I'm in Russia? And then the gentleman said, well, I see it on Facebook. And I said, I never see you on Facebook. And he said, no, I never post or anything, I just go look around, right? Every editor that I know books people from their Instagram. So you have to have a presence in those places, whether you want to believe it or not. And they shouldn't be mixed too much with your personal stuff, but you need to create a presence on that, right? I think it's really important. So I want to show you a little bit more of Marcellus Look work because I think it's really extraordinary. Not only the kind of models he books, but all the details that go into some of the extraordinary images that he makes. So, interesting casting, right? We tend to cast people. We all tend to find certain kinds of people beautiful. And we tend to cast versions of what we find beautiful. That becomes problematic. So for those of you who look at your portfolio and it seems diverse, but perhaps it isn't, I would suggest creating a shoot and casting exactly the opposite of what you see in your work. Exactly the opposite kind of people for 2 or 3 shoots. Why? Because it'll force you to see differently. It'll shake up the way you see. It'll change the way you style. It'll force you to see the world a little differently. Now, Marcella's image is quite gorgeous, right? It's very formally beautiful. We follow the eye to the arm. We come back through the hand and back to the eye, and then we move back through, right? It seems like a simple beauty image, but it isn't. Formally, it's really quite stunning. And in terms of color, he's taken this little gold on the lip. It picks up the eyebrow, it picks up the eyelash, it picks up the hair and the eyeliner. So what he's doing, and you see a little touch of gold on the hands, right? So they've been highlighted with gold. That begins to tie this whole picture together, because as we move through, this is the center point, but these touches of gold tie this together. And look at the pinks. There's a little pink here, a touch here. It speaks to the tone of the nails and the colors we see down here. So not only is it formally cohesive and the model extraordinary, but he's taken the time to work with his stylist and his makeup artist to create a palette throughout the image that ties that image together and makes it cohesive. Those things are important. You need to be aware. A million little details, like I said earlier, that make something work. Color, little gold here, here. That all brings that out, right? On a simple background. The background's a little gorgeous purple that it also touches the lip, right? Everything's intentional. Color needs to be intentional in your work. It can't be accidental. Another picture, a series of pictures by Miriam. This is Tommy Lee. I was in Russia, I don't know, a few months ago, and I said, this is Tommy Lee, and there was silence. Nobody knew who he was. That was a little rough. So I had to explain what he was and who he was, and that he was in a band, and he actually had been famous and was, and is extraordinary. But it's a beautiful image, right? A hat, jeans, topless, but it exudes a sense of style that's inescapable, and a sense of confidence and style. The image on the right was for a fashion brand, and I love the duality, the feeling of luxury of the material. You get this luxe sense of material and gesture. You have this great belt, hand-sewn, thick leather, so you understand that there's luxury to this, right? It's very luxe, but it's played against the tattoos and the weathered hands, right? So this idea of luxurious rebellion becomes part of the dialogue of Miriam's fashion work as well as her music work. It's really smart. The other thing she does is she photographs details. It's all about these details. And you need to take time when you shoot fashion. We saw Therese Joel shoot very wide. But you also need to get in and photograph the details, because the details make a difference. And they also add pace to your story, just like moving up and photographing a big face. Gesture and emotion, right? So we saw it in another picture, and I want you to see it here, the idea of gesture. You need to utilize gesture in your images, a little bit of movement. Still against moving. Gesture becomes important. The personality of the girl, it isn't just the clothes, it's the girl in the clothes, or the boy in the clothes, the man in the clothes, the woman in the clothes, right? Who are they? What is their personality like? How do I relate to it? How do they manifest that? That's all very important, right? So it's not just about the clothes and the makeup and the space, but it's about the person inside the clothes and how you manifest that. Don't be afraid of emotion. Don't be afraid of movement, right? A lot of people, how do you get a model to laugh or cry? How do you get that space, right? Your job as an image maker is to, if this is your studio, is to create not only a physical environment, but an emotional environment in which people feel safe. So how do I walk in and trust you and trust your team? How do I walk in and be willing to do the things you need to ask of me or the rest of your team to get a compelling fashion image, right? So for some people that starts out with conversation in the makeup room. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't like to leave all my good conversation in the makeup room. I can talk in front of an audience like this, but small talk isn't my strength at all. But for some people, it's in the makeup room. For other people, it's creating a physical space. But how do you build that idea of trust? And how do you get a model to buy in, right? You need to get somebody to buy in. So you need great references, you need a great concept, and you need to be all in. If you're questioning what you're doing, your team will see it and feel it. If you're pre-production, your production isn't tight, and you're spending the whole time worrying about Is it technically right? Are those lights in the right place? Is the catering here? Am I doing that? Did I do this? The better part of your brain is not going to be involved in the shoot, and your team's going to know it. They're going to feel it. They're going to sense it. You're going to lose your model, and you're going to lose your creative team. Pre-produce well, create an environment in which people feel comfortable and they trust, and then take some risks. And you have to take some risks. It's hard to get people to move. So a lot of people like to photograph somebody jumping, right? Arthur Elgort loves it. People jumping. All right, jump. I'm going to take a picture of you jumping. That's interesting. Well, maybe if you take a picture of somebody jumping 15 times, and the 15th time they stumble and they come up laughing, that's the picture. Frequently, it isn't about the jump, or it isn't about the physicality. It's about what happens between the jumps. It's what happens when somebody laughs, when somebody's frustrated with you after they do it the 20th time, and they're really not happy. That's the picture, right? Sometimes you need to take those in-between moments. Some people connect with themselves physically, so you need to get them physically engaged with the shoot. Other people will engage intellectually, so you need to engage them intellectually. You can count on music, but what happens? If I play your favorite music, when you listen to your favorite music, how do you act? Right? There's a certain way you act. That's the picture I'm going to get. If I play my favorite music, I'm happy, but you might hate it. And maybe that's okay. Or maybe I pick some music that moves us both into a different space that asks us to create in a new way and moves us both off axis, right? Maybe somebody walks in and they're nervous. Nervous isn't bad. If somebody's nervous and you don't say a lot to them, they begin to move around, they begin to laugh, they begin to fidget, they begin to ask if it's okay, they begin to try things. Maybe being nervous is all right for a little while. A lot of models are used to being told they're gorgeous every 3 seconds. You're beautiful. Oh my God, do that. Oh my God, it's amazing. Oh my God, yeah. Maybe you say that and that works. Maybe you pump up the energy, or maybe you don't. Silence can be a really powerful tool. Not in a negative way. I'm not saying you should be mean or abusive. What I'm saying, though, is if you wait and see what somebody does and give them direction and talk to them, not say anything, but save the compliments for when you're getting to the point you really want something, you need something you're building, that'll have a different effect, right? So you manage your set. You manage the people on your set. It's like the light. It's like the garments. It's like the makeup. Everything has to begin to be tailored to the client, the model, the situation that you're working in. Fashion and architecture. This is also by Jonathan Camboris. It's about still life and clothes as architecture. I think it's just a beautiful image. It's so smart, right? You're given this pair of shoes, and how do you photograph these shoes to make them look architectural, to make them look heroic? Really, very simple, but very smart, beautifully lit, right? You see the movement of the leather, you see the quality, the heel, the tones are perfect, the stitching here, the box isn't a throwaway, everything speaks to luxury, everything's smart, everything's well lit. Also the use of architectural space and changing perspectives. See how the camera moves? It changes how you engage with the model in the piece, right? So looking down in an architectural space, the girl laying back changes everything up. But it's the use of architecture, the idea of architecture in fashion. Another way, another shoot concept, something else that's different. Emotion. Fiona Diefenbacher, who's a faculty at fashion in the School of Fashion at Parsons, talks a lot about emotional dressing and how we dress affects our emotions. There's some people simply, like Stephen, dress emotionally. It's a reflection of his personality. So as you're creating a shoot, how do you create the idea of emotional dressing or dressing emotionally? Is that a concept you can use? Is color part of what makes us emotional, or is it the style? Is it just the man inside the clothes? Right? We talked about making a model comfortable, and Kate Edwards does that really beautifully. First, I'd like you to look at how beautifully that skirt is articulated, right? Every seam, everything is perfectly moving. There are wrinkles here, but none of them feel out of place, right? The styling is gorgeous. The shirt fits well, it's a little loose, but it's fun and playful in the same way the girl is. The shoes pick up the white and they play off it. Everything is perfectly, everything in this casual picture is perfectly thought out. So it seems like a girl sitting in a plastic chair laughing. It is. But everything that went into making that image was intentional. There's nothing in that picture that isn't intentional. So you sit a girl in a chair, and then how do you get her to laugh like that, right? First you change the camera angle to make her feel a little more heroic and fun, but you still need her to pose because the clothes need to look perfect. But as we talked about before, how do you create a space and a connection with the model to give you that honest, and honest is a word we don't use a lot in photography anymore, but how do you get an honest emotional response? that makes the clothes and the brand feel authentic. Because that authenticity is what we relate to, right? If it were a forced laugh, if we didn't believe it, if the styling wasn't right, or she looked uncomfortable, we wouldn't buy into the image. It wouldn't be successful. The brand wouldn't be successful, the photograph, right? Authenticity and honesty. How do you create honesty in photography? That's part of your job. So it isn't, again, just taking pictures and styling and creating a space. It's how you create that space. Nature. All right, I want you to use nature and fashion. Well, a lot of us immediately get an image, but I love these two examples. This is also Kate, but I love the way she took the girl, put her in this large environmental space, and utilized color to tell a story. It's an engaging picture, and it's smart, right? It would have been easy to set the girl there without the use of color, or to take her in another location, lean her against the tree. Oh, here's fashion and nature, right? But it's a smart picture. So Thea Colvin had one-of-a-kind garments made and then traveled around the United States and to Iceland and photographed each garment in a location that fit the garment. Extraordinary work, right? So in Ireland, she stopped in Ireland too, in addition to Iceland. This is in Iceland. But each image, the location reflects the structure of the garment, the color of the garment, the emotional tenor of the garment, and the larger piece. That's an intelligent use of nature to illustrate a fashion image. It's not just, let's go out and shoot in the woods, let's go out and shoot by the river. It's intentional, right? So as you're beginning to see repeatedly many different styles, many different ideas, but it needs to be intentional, it needs to be pre-produced, it needs to be well thought out, and it needs to connect with the brand and the audience. A little bit more by Miriam. This is a fashion campaign she shot. I love all the little details here, the way the cigarette hangs in the hand, it's really beautiful. The tattoo across the knuckles. But there are any number of ways you could have shown that scarf. She puts it around his face. He's the musician, he's the bandit. He's a very luxurious bandit, but he's a bandit. The shaved head, the cross playing against, and and Satan and the religious symbols playing against the idea of the bandit. And I love just the little cut eyebrow and the little tattoos, right? Just those four little lines. That helps tell the story. She could have shot this from the front and we would have lost all these amazing details that help tell us what this is about. But you take them in a profile, it's still quite beautiful. We see all of the materials used. The idea of him being kind of this rebellious, luxurious fashioneer is really an interesting idea, right? She took, again, a very simple picture, came up with a solution that tells us a larger story. Same thing with the cigarette. You can all try to take that picture. That's hard. That's a really hard picture to take. So is the one on the top. The quality of light, the delicate feel, the gesture, try it. It's difficult. You're going to need to find ways to get people to be that comfortable with you, to manifest those kind of things. Digital. So how do we, digital, we all use it. We use it in different ways. Sometimes it's cliche, sometimes it isn't. This is by Stephanie Wang. And the use of replication, I think, is really fun. It's not a new idea, but I think she did it really well. The model choice is great. The black and the white and the styling. Using digital, what does that mean in our work? This is a graphic design over a fashion photograph. So how do you begin to combine graphic design and illustration, digital again, with contemporary photography? But I also want you to consider the idea of 3D printing. 3D printers and 3D printing are becoming important in terms of garments. This could easily be a 3D printed overlay over a skirt. So what does it mean to build overstructure and understructure? And what does that mean in terms of your imagery, right? We have a lot more options. I love the way the shoes are off. I think that's really fun little touch, right? It makes it feel a little more contemporary. So what is technology? How's technology affecting what we're doing? Outside the camera, we have 3D printing, we have graphic design. You guys should partner with graphic designers. You should be working with a creative team. You should find people to partner with you. You don't need to do the whole lift by yourself. And sometimes So-Min Kim is a designer on this, a graphic designer. And you find somebody like So-Min who brings a completely different visual perspective to the shoot and to your photograph, and she takes it to another level, right? It's a collaboration. A collaboration doesn't diminish your work. A lot of photographers feel that it does, right? And photographers, we're awful because we want to do everything ourselves, right? So maybe we want to find a good stylist or good makeup artist, but we really want to like shoot it, print it, edit it, do everything ourselves. We love that control. And you don't need all that control. If you can do it, that's great. But if you find a good collaborator, sometimes that collaboration can elevate your work to a level that you haven't seen before. Your everyday life can be a great concept, right? You hang out at a local diner. How do you shoot your study, photograph your fashion at a local diner or a bar, right? There was a little diner in North Hollywood, California when I lived out there. I had breakfast there once a month. One day I asked a couple if we could photograph there on a Sunday morning before they opened, and they loved it. They gave us the whole diner. We had this great series of windows, brought in 3 models, a whole team. We had the diner for the morning. I gave them some pictures for the wall, right? The guy who ran it asked me to bring him a 6-pack of beer. I did that. They made us some omelets afterwards, and we had a great time, right? You can find places that allow you to have access, right? A well-dressed gentleman reading. It's a simple idea, but it's a beautiful picture by David Wang, right? Really beautiful. Also an honest and authentic image, a beautifully articulated image. David graduated from Parsons about 8 years ago. Did you know David? David graduated about 8 years ago, and he was a classical pianist. He grew up in China, or Taiwan, a classical pianist. And David was wound, he'll hear this, he'll love it. He was very tight. Like, you couldn't get David to relax. So you really had to push David to engage his models in a different way. But his work is extraordinarily clean and beautifully rendered. So David has been shooting actually covers for Bazaar in the Middle East. He's been shooting for a number of clients there. He's been working in Dubai regularly for the last few years. He does a lot of beauty work, but he's taken these ideas of every day and this really kind of very strict idea of how he wants to structure things and articulate them and made it his style, and it's turned into an enormous career. Here's another idea of lifestyle, your everyday life. I talked about Diggy earlier, but I love this image. This is just one of the docks in an area in which she grew up. And this is how she grew up, hanging out on the dock with her sisters and her friends. So she took a team up there, they styled them, and she recreated scenes from her childhood. And she recreated these scenes that she grew up with, something she understood. Something that resonates certainly with many people, this idea of hanging out, talking with your friends, just spending a lazy summer day. Point of view is everything. There's a lot of content out there. A truly unique perspective and voice is the only way to build an audience and create a following. Don't try to appeal to everyone. No one can. I think that's really important. Nobody's going to appeal to everybody. When I gave an art talk here the other day, I said if there are 1,000 galleries in the United States and 996 of them don't like your work, you have a great career. If 6 galleries like your work, you have a great career, right? How many clients have to like your work commercially or editorially, art buyers or art directors, to make your career? Right? There are many ways that you can build a successful career. Everybody they just won't like your work. You have to accept that. Nor should everybody. Because if everybody likes your work, it's not compelling. You're not taking risks. You're not making anything that's groundbreaking enough that's really something that can build a career. So if everybody likes it, it's a problem. So, and it just can't work that way at a certain level. Mario Sorrente, when we were talking the other evening, he talked about how he found working for American Vogue impossible. His work was either too commercial or not commercial enough. It was just a client that he couldn't work for. He talked about clients that had fired him, much to his credit. I don't know that everybody would have been that open, but he said their shoots that have been killed and clients that have let me go because maybe my vision didn't fit their vision, and that was okay. And I respect that. It's part of all of our career, right? It's just part of what we do. So be true to what you have to say and be consistent in that messaging. Be consistent in your portfolio development. Be consistent in your branding, right? Your brand should support who you are, it should reflect who you are, and it should reflect what's in your portfolio. Right? If you're shooting all nature stuff and it's really kind of sustainable and beautiful and nature, then your cards and everything around you should reflect that. If you're really urban and harder edged, the font you choose, the kind of card you choose, the other things should reflect that, right? I'm a big fan of creating a promotional piece and then creating a business card without an image. I know that's not popular in some circles, but I hold on to business cards forever and I expect promotional pieces to change. Right? So as you evolve, you send out those promotional pieces, but if I have that photograph that you took 7 years ago and that's what I see every time I think of you, hopefully you're doing new work by that point. Simple business card I think is fine. A beautiful promotional piece, done regularly, whether online or not, is essential. Your branding needs to carry across your website. So if you're creating a visual brand, you're choosing a font, you're choosing a color, you're choosing a system or branding system, that needs to be on your business card and on your promos and on your website. It needs to be everywhere you exist. The same feeling needs to exist on your Instagram and Facebook. It won't be the same font, of course, but you need to take that same visual style everywhere so there's a consistency. So wherever I look as an editor or an art buyer or an art director, I understand who you are. Big part of your job is not giving an editor or an art buyer a reason not to hire you. Does that make sense? Because frequently what people do is they undermine themselves. They edit their portfolio or they edit the spread on their website, and you always add that one picture you shouldn't put there, right? Guilty, right? You know it. You edit it and you're like, but I love it, but it doesn't belong. But man, I love that picture, and you put it in. And maybe it keeps you from getting a job, right? Because it isn't as strong as the other ones, but it was a great day, or you really liked that person, or it was one of your favorites forever, or oh my gosh, like all those reasons don't matter when you're editing. You have to edit to not give people a reason not to hire you. People will always look at the disparity between your images, right? If they aren't consistent. Or they will look at the weakest imagery and imagine that's what they're going to get, right? The other thing you don't want to do on your website is to put, or your Instagram or other places, is 4 or 5 different kinds of work, assuming the editor is going to choose the one they like best. What you're doing is saying, I don't know who I am as an image maker, and I don't know the kind of imagery I do best, and I really want you to tell me. Well, if an editor hires you and their job is on the line, they don't have time to do that for you, right? They just don't. You really have to begin to define and evolve your visual style, and your visual style will evolve. Everybody expects that. Things change. But editors can't take that risk, right? It's like being referred. If I refer somebody, the person I refer you to, it's my name, not yours, in the end. Because if I refer a couple of people who are horrible, then my reputation isn't the same, right? And as you move up the ladder, those referrals have more gravity and they cost more. So it's important to refer people. That's the other half of this. All the things your mom told you: be on time, be responsible, be trustworthy on set. I had a guy who begged me to assist for, I swear, 1.5 years. So finally one day I took him on a big job, and he stole the fashion designer's phone. No names, I kid you not. If he's out there, he's just, but it's true story. And I had to explain why, and then he bolted. I had to explain why I brought someone on set who was willing to do that. It became my fault, right? And really put that relationship in jeopardy. And I think in the long run, cost me the relationship in the long run. So you are responsible for the people you refer. You are responsible for how you portray yourself both on set and off, and how you portray yourself visually and in terms of your marketing. It's all important. I can't stress it enough. And the other thing that applies here is when I do the fine art talk is when somebody wants to hire you, just write thank you. Can't wait to meet you. Can't wait for the meeting. Can't wait to work with you. Don't write anything cute or crazy because you're really happy. Just back away from the keyboard. Don't do anything crazy, right? You're not now best friends. You're not going to go drinking, maybe, but you're probably not like going to be best friends and hanging out. Don't start asking about their personal life. Dial it back a little bit, right? Because we're so excited. Like, I love whenever anybody wants to hire me or likes my work. You need to be careful, because sometimes you say things that you probably shouldn't say. So I want to show you a little bit of work that I think illustrates a really unique point of view. This is from a young photographer, Tanner Abel. I think it's a really beautiful piece. Also very simple. What is it? It's a gray backdrop, a pair of black pants, and a white box. Beautiful light, amazing casting, great gesture, great attitude, an incredible picture, right? Extraordinary image. Here's another one by Jess. You, Jess.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I love this picture. And I think the perspective is really amazing. Also, by the way, they want to include your work in a couple of articles. While I'm thinking about it, ask me afterwards. Yeah. I love the idea of falling, and I love not the idea of falling, but having this giant space in which to fall in, right? We rarely see fashion in this perspective, but the idea of the energy in the space, it's taking what we imagine as fashion and just changing it enough to make it compelling, right? Is it something somebody else could have thought of? And this isn't digital, correct? This is in camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So she didn't just take this girl, cut her out, put her in the air. This is all shot on set. Smart. It's fun. And no, she isn't falling through the air and about to hit the ground 6 feet later. So no models were harmed in the taking of this picture. But or the Model Association calls me. but I think it's really important that you find a different way. It's a unique perspective, right? As Karen Rabinowitz said, Karen Rabinowitz actually, from Brand Architects, started out as an influencer and then segued into creating digital brand architects. And she has this extraordinary company that now builds brands for people specializing in the online space, but they've moved into print in other ways. She's extraordinary and she's very kind. But the idea of a unique point of view that makes you stand out and gives you an identity is important. How can you not like this? It's chickens. Who puts chickens in a fashion shoot, right? It's a great menswear story. Beautiful texture that fits the jacket, right? You feel the texture of the jacket. The tones are great. The reds of the chickens or the roosters really set off the picture. It's the only real color with the green. It's beautifully lit, right? Great menswear picture, but it's quirky and it's unique and you remember it. It's different. It's not crazy. It doesn't need to be insane, but it's beautiful, right? So what are ways to show your point of view, your creativity? You could take those out, and this would just be, it's like a nice-looking guy in a cool space, right? You add the chickens, it's cool, right? So that's my advice today, add chickens. That's it. It's as good as it gets. French Cowboy did this great shoot about socks. You get hired to do a shoot about socks. Probably the first thing you think is not, I'm going to stick somebody in the back of a jet engine with their body hanging out and the socks showing. Great piece though, right? They did a whole series of these quirky little vignettes with legs hanging out of these different places with socks. It's really smart. The blue in the background and the blue in the plane and the blue, right? Again, great color choices, all these blues, pick up the blue in the sock, we have the clouds in the clouds. It's just really smart, it's really simple, it's really beautifully articulated, nicely styled, well cast, right? The girl, the legs, the feet, they're all appropriate for the shoot. The socks aren't dirty, I have to say, maybe they clean them up, but those little things are important. A lot of times people don't do that, which kind of blows my mind. So the bottom of a shoe, if it's rough and dirty, you need to clean that, unless it's about that. What? Low battery. Oh, thank you. Maybe I'll do this. Thank you. But really great, different perspective, fun, creative, quirky. How do you create a point of view that's your own? You remember French Cowboy because you remember these things, and a lot of their work is like this. They're a couple based in Paris. Therese and Joel, this great black and white, right, that you saw in the surfer images and on the cover of the book, but you also see it here. Beautiful use of foreground, background. People don't use that anymore, right? It's really too sad, but it's really a stunning and very simple device. Foreground, background, they bring her really forward in the frame. These textures are extraordinary. The beautiful blacks, the makeup, right? The makeup fits, and the look, the gaze, she engages you in just an extraordinary way, right? But if you pulled back farther, it might be a beautiful image, but you lose that quirky sensibility. And little things like this, the hair blowing. I hear a lot of people say, I don't want to shoot today, it's a windy day and that's gonna suck. But you know what, if there's a little breeze, you get this. Or maybe you have a great train or a great scarf and you get some beautiful movement with it, right? We all get stuck with situations that aren't ideal when we go out on a shoot. The problem is, in fashion, those are rarely excuses. In any photo shoot, it's rarely an excuse. Your job is to problem solve. Well, sometimes you can use that weather. Like I said, I work in Russia a lot, in northern Russia. It's gray all winter, but that gray in Norway or the northern part of that country is absolutely stunning light when you get into the spring and the fall. It's stunning. There's no place in the world that has that light. It's just hard to convince the people who live there that it's beautiful. But it is. But I guess when you live in gray skies like 6 months a year, it's not so interesting. In Murmansk, by the way, when you get farther enough north, there's a town that I visited that has 21 days where the sun never goes down and 21 days where the sun never rises. Can you imagine 21 days in the middle of winter with no sunlight? I would be crazy. I would be on the news. So foreground, background. Take advantage of the light. Take advantage of the situation. Cloudy skies, you make it work, right? You bring in that great texture. You bring her really close. And this isn't, she is not digitally placed in this image. This is a photograph, right? It's done in camera. Alexander Lubin, who is a photographer in Kaliningrad, Russia, addresses ideas of culture. And he does a whole series of images on culture. The one on the left are replications of pioneers. Pioneers were the communist version of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts during the Soviet era. And it was kind of a method of indoctrination. Everybody had these red scarves. You went to camp. You learned all the right things. Everybody did the same exercises. It was pretty interesting. On the one on the right, I have to say, Chuck Norris. Russians love Chuck Norris. Absolutely love Chuck Norris. And they will tell you, the guys will tell you, that the best action hero ever is Bruce Willis. They said, forget Superman, he has superpowers. Bruce Willis, he's a real man. He always does it on his own. I kid you not. Russians love Bruce Willis. And Steven Seagal, they do love Steven. Stephen hangs there with Mr. Putin. So, but I want you to look at the commentary, the lifestyle, the home, the matryoshka, which is a cultural illustration of like the happy Russian home or a happy Russian family. The girl bent over to mimic the matryoshka, or the nesting dolls, but also reflecting kind of really the lifestyle. This was shot in 2006, 2007, and would probably be appropriate now, reflecting the cultural downturn and the issues and demands facing people in Russia and kind of the pressure as things are a little less free and the economy is failing. So cultural representation, right? You can utilize ideas of culture in your image. Bruce Weber shoots ideas of Americana, right? All of his images are based on the idea of Americana. In Istanbul, the magazine Vogue does not have the same circulation as the rest of the country. So a Vogue Turkey woman, every issue, every magazine, every brand has their man or woman, their guy or their girl, is much younger in my opinion. Around her 30s, someone who works, has a stylish life and intellectual interests. She wants to know what's going on in the world, but at the same time wants to create a change. I think that's pretty extraordinary because the Vogue Turkey woman lives in one of the main cities and one of the cultural centers, but as we discussed in the rest of our conversation, when you get to provincial areas, whether that's in China or Russia or Turkey, you have a little different dialogue. So how do you begin to change the fashion you do or change what you do depending on your audience? Or if I'm shooting for Vogue Turkey, I need to know the woman that I'm photographing for. This is a designer named Queenie and Stone Zhu, who did the photograph. I put this in because I think it's really important. You see the dragon, you see the Buddha, you see the other cultural symbols utilized in Queenie's garment. And it's important to both have a designer that respects these symbols and doesn't use them as throwaway, but also a photographer who utilizes them in a way that respects the culture. As your images move cross-culturally, that's essential. There was a campaign that used a girl with a Chinese changing screen behind her, and everybody in America and Europe liked the image. The problem is when it got to China, the dynasty and the representation on the screen was offensive in a fashion context, right? They had to pull the ad. As your images move through different cultures, you need to understand how that image functions. And I call it a little bit intellectual colonization. We have a feeling here, particularly in New York right now, and what our cultural history, our social history, and what we believe is right. And we want the rest of the world to believe it. And that becomes problematic when you begin to impart our sociocultural history to entire parts of the world with billions of people. Now, we can argue the rightness and wrongness of some of that, and there's certain things that I believe are right in the world that we should promote. But you can't deny thousands of years of social and cultural history. And when you begin to have a dialogue with the client, or you begin to make imagery that functions in those areas, you need to understand how that functions. On the other hand, talking to a producer of a lot of Japanese and Korean work here in the States, a lot of Japanese and Korean clients want to replicate American ads. So if they're going to do something Ralph Lauren-ish, they want the girl, they want the same location, they want the same photographer. Or a lot of Korean campaigns imagine a New York girl to be a tall, thin, blonde girl. And the producer, we've talked, she'll regularly say, well, that's not the case. And the client will say, that's okay, we want a tall, thin, blonde girl, because they believe that's kind of the American girl, and that's New York, and that's what they want to represent. So not only are cultural tendencies sometimes conservative and sometimes about colors and traditions and symbols, but other times they're about the ways in which different cultures work. You also need to have, I would suggest, if you're going to work internationally, Always have a great translator, and I always suggest not using the client's translator alone, because I've been to places where the client will say, no, this translator is amazing. He or she will be perfect. It's one of the best people in our town, and you get there, and it just doesn't work. They just can't translate. They get really nervous. Find a translator, interview them online, right? Send your assistant ahead if you're working internationally so they can get to a location and understand if there really is electricity, if you really do have permits, if you really can shoot there in the morning, right? Always have somebody scout when you get somewhere internationally. You need to problem solve as much as possible. Be aware of power changes, be aware of equipment. Know that we have access to everything in New York in a way that few people in the world do. So when you get on location somewhere in the south of France, you might not have a camera for a 12-hour drive or a 10-hour drive. You might not have a backup strobe. So you need to take extra everything. Consider those things when you begin to work in an international context. Almost done. So you're only as good as the worst thing you have done, because that might be the only thing people see. If you have a store and have a great product, but the bags break on the way home, then that is as good as you are. Ms. Simon Collins. And I think that's great. I also think it applies to photography, right? Not you're only as good as the worst thing you've done, because if you think of your favorite photographer or artist, think of that person. What images come to mind? 10 images, 20 images, 50 maybe, if it's somebody legendary like Penn or Avedon. Think of how many tens or hundreds of thousands of images that person made to get the 30 that you remember, right? Great image makers create a lot of bad work to get there, right? We hold ourselves to this standard, but we forget all the pictures that are taken to create the ones that we see, the ones that become iconic. Even the pictures that ran in magazines and advertisements that have long since disappeared, right? By iconic image makers, but weren't great enough for us to know and understand and visualize. So it's not that you're as good as the worst thing you've done. You have to fail, right? Positive forms of failure are risk-taking and not doing well, trying hard, trying something new and not taking well. Bad forms of failure are not prepping enough, not working hard enough, thinking you can pull it off without reproducing, or not planning, right? Those are negative forms of failure. So I'm not saying that you're only as good as your worst image. You're going to take a lot of bad pictures. But you are as good as the worst image in your portfolio or on your website or on your Instagram or some other places, right? Don't be afraid to curate. A portfolio of 20 images is great at this point, or 24, 18, right? As long as they're strong, but don't put in those extra 2 that are going to subvert you. You don't need 50 images in each section on your website, 20, and always a client's going to ask for more. So be ready and ask for more, right? If you call a modeling agency and you want to work with them and you're calling a new faces booker to do a test, have a PDF of a sample of 10 or 12 images, maybe 15 images ready to go. Have the email written, have the PDF attached. When the booker says, send me your website or a sample of your work and I'll get back to you, don't do that because they're busy. They might never get back. Say, okay, what's your email address? They'll give it to you. You type it in, you have your link, you have your PDF, and you say, sent. Tell me what you think. And you get that answer right away, right? Be smart about it. So take care of these things, but make sure that when you create that PDF and you create that website or you create that business card or those other things, that it's good. Because if it's a throwaway, that's what represents you. So you're only as good as the worst thing that you put out in the world. Just a little ending image by Alexander Lubin, because I like it. I think she's fun. I think it's quirky. These are the Instagram accounts. If you want to do a shot of the people in the book, the majority of the photographers in the book, that's my social media information. But if you like some of the photographers, please take an image and look them up. It's an extraordinary group.
Can I ask one irrelevant question?
Yeah.
Where in Wisconsin did you grow up?
I grew up in Mequon, which is just north of Milwaukee on the...
I grew up in Kenosha.
Oh, you did? Oh, that's fun. Yeah. I know exactly.
I know too.
I get back every once in a while. I miss it. It's a great way. It's a great way to grow up. A great way to live. And thank you all for being here today. The book's available on Amazon or today, or you can order them on Instagram. Any questions you have, please ask. I hope you found it useful. I'll be honest with you, it's the first time I've done this talk ever. So I was really nervous before I came in. Am I supposed to say that? But Stephanie asked me to present on the book, so it's the first time I've done it. So I hope it worked out. I hope you found it useful. Thank you. Thanks.